Job interviews, career and life advice from just about everybody. Hello again, and welcome to the second episode of the Job Interviews podcast. I think a lot of people are going to be very interested in our guest today, who is a doctor, and who is one of those people who knew from a very early age that he wanted to be a doctor, and then went out and became one, which, you sum it up in one sentence like that, it doesn't sound like such an accomplishment. It sounds
straightforward, but it's
actually pretty hard.
Not that common.
Yeah, and he has a lot of real-world experience, of course, which should be interesting to anyone who is considering going into the medical field. But even if you aren't considering going into that field, I think it's super useful to understand how it works in general. Yeah. And maybe listening to him, you'll realize it is actually something that you would be interested in pursuing.
Yeah, absolutely. We get into a lot of the reality of the day-to-day life that, he has, and that's not going to be exactly the same for every doctor, but I think there's definitely some common themes that probably are not what you would expect.
Sure.
If you
I would imagine doing that. For a lot of people, doctor is one of those professions where your idea of what it's like to be one, if you don't closely know a doctor, your idea of what it's like to be a doctor is probably heavily shaped by TV shows.
Yeah, it's one of those, there's certain jobs you don't see all the time in TV and movies and media and everything, right. But this is definitely one that's kind of glamorized. Not one of those
jobs, right?
Yeah, and you have a certain perception that may not be accurate if you watch, Grey's Anatomy and think that going to med school means you're going to be one of those people, then that's probably not necessarily true.
A long time ago that suggested that it was like a talk with a bunch of doctors, and it mentioned that the TV show Scrubs was like the closest that any show had ever gotten to.
Interesting.
Actually. Yeah, that's not an endorsement of the show Scrubs. I've only watched like a few episodes. Yeah. But it was kind of an interesting, sort of a comedy take on things, and it shows
sort of the tragicomic kind of.
Yeah, the ups and the downs, the emotional aspects of everything.
The voiceover at the end of every day.
The voiceover.
Which is super accurate.
Voiceover.
They have the intercom in the hospital. Somebody comes in. You know what we learned today?
Right, exactly.
So anyway. And then another interesting aspect of this interview was, outside of the entire med school doctor aspect, to hear from David about his personal academic experience was very interesting because I think most of us see someone who is able to get through med school and get hired and be a doctor and help people. That must be like a super genius academic whiz kind of person. And I would have thought of David like that. But to hear him say it, it was more about insecurity and like really hard work and him being convinced that he wasn't going to hack it unless he really pushed himself. And that was really interesting. It was,
I think it's also reflective. We'll let him get into the details obviously in the interview, but it's reflective of what I've heard from a lot of doctors, who've gone on.
That, from the outside, we might see them as, oh, wow, this person can handle any, academic challenge or practical challenge or whatever. And, if you're in the middle of that, then you might feel a lot less confident in your abilities and concerned that you're not going to make it through and all of that.
I was also very interested in sort of David's view of his own family and the way that his family experience in a variety of ways shaped his medical practice. And I think that is something that can be broadly applied to a whole bunch of different careers, not only, to him in this career.
Yeah.
So, without further ado, why don't we stop talking about the interview and actually have the interview?
I think that sounds like a good idea.
Okay.
Hello, we are here with Dr. David Khosrowzadeh. Get it right, because he gets real fussy if you don't call him that.
You can still pronounce it. I'm very proud.
Of course I can. I actually went to high school with David. Mike went to the same high school, but not at the same time, because he is aged. But yes, we have not spoken or caught up in a while, so I'm quite eager to hear all about your journey. So you want to just introduce yourself, give your name, and just a brief description,
we already gave his name.
Yeah, well,
again, if you weren't listening, David Khosrowzadeh.
Dr.
David Khosrowzadeh. Still, I go by Dr. David around the hospital because I've gotten tired of correcting people so many times.
Not Dr. K?
No, there's another Dr. K.
There is.
Dr. K2?
There's actually two Dr. Ks.
Dr. K3.
Yeah, they got it. Dr. David seemed easier.
Are they also Khosrowzadehs, or are they?
Close.
Really.
Not quite. Not as many syllables.
Okay.
Huh.
Yeah.
Are there no other doctors, David?
Not that have claimed that.
Okay.
They usually have more manageable last names, so they went with those.
All right. That would clear that up. Okay.
Does anyone ever think that David is your last name? Think of like Sam David? Like that's
No, that's never actually come up. Huh. I think most people see what I'm dealing with and just.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah. Dr. Right. David. Yeah.
Got it.
Yes.
All right. So we've interrupted you several times. So just, I guess a brief overview of your current occupation.
Yeah. So I'm a physician, an internal medicine physician. With that, that's kind of a wide net, but I'm a hospitalist. So I work as a primary care doctor for patients in the hospital setting. Anybody that goes to the ER doctor's job, they're kind of the gatekeepers of the hospital. If they can get someone well and send them home, they will. If they need to admit them, keep them in the hospital, then they'll call me and I take over as their primary doctor during their hospitalization. I prefer it to being in the outpatient setting because things happen much faster, a lot less red tape, and I like inpatient acute care. People are a little bit more sick, and so.
And that's what you
I know.
They're a little more
they're a little more sick.
No, but it's more like you can have a more direct impact. You can more use your training and everything.
Yeah,
I assume is what you meant.
Or maybe that's not it.
Yeah. We'll go with that.
Yeah. So is that what you anticipated you'd be doing when you were starting med school? Like, at what point did you say, this is the field I'd like to go into, or was it more that it just kind of made sense? And
sure.
How did that go?
I knew I wanted to be in primary care. I didn't know, inpatient, outpatient.
Sorry, can you explain, not just for our audience, but also for me, what is primary care and how does it contrast with other?
I guess going back to my why I wanted to become a doctor and who kind of inspired me, my grandfather was a general practitioner. So he graduated University of Louisville, med school, and practice. He was kind of the first doctor in Fort Myers. And
in Fort Myers?
Yeah.
At all?
Like when Fort Myers was being
back when it was
being
a fort.
Settled.
Yeah. He lived in the fort, actually.
Kind of when the city was really kind of up and coming, he was the guy.
That's really cool. Was it I guess a small town doctor?
Small town, kind of rural at the time doctor as the city was kind of coming up.
That's really interesting. Okay, so. Yeah.
So he was a general practitioner or a primary care doctor at the time, and back then, 70s, 80s, 90s, primary care doctors did it all. They did surgeries, small surgeries. They delivered babies. They did procedures in the office. He did colonoscopies. He was kind of, jack of all trades.
Sure.
And so growing up, my mom was always really proud of him. We kind of had a joke in the family, like we couldn't go anywhere without my mom somehow mentioning her dad was a doctor, like somewhere in the conversation. And so, her love for that, and then my dad being Iranian, Persians, they really value basically three professions. It's physicians, lawyers, and engineers. If you're not that, or landowner, then you really are a failure as a son. So I had a good amount of
land,
gentle encouragement towards becoming a physician.
Yeah. Okay.
And from an early age, and I shadowed my grandfather a couple summers, and he was kind of a grump.
Still working in Fort Myers?
Yeah, okay. Still working in Fort Myers. He was kind of a grump, like around family and so forth, but in the office he was like a different person. Put on the coat, and he just had so much more energy and charisma. And
that's really interesting.
So
do you think, if I can interrupt, was that I don't want to call it like an act, but I mean, was that something he consciously did for the patients, or do you think he just internally liked it so much that it?
I'd like to tell myself that it was something that he just really enjoyed doing.
Kind of, yeah. That's so cool.
He just, I don't know, he just came alive.
Sure.
And maybe, used all of his energy, and by the time he got home, there wasn't much left.
Look at all these healthy people. Just a waste of my time.
I wish they were more sick.
Should have become a hospitalist.
You love that.
So, I didn't mean to interrupt, sorry. So you
How
shadowed
old
him,
were you
with
those summers you were saying when you went to go shadow him?
I was probably middle school. approaching high school.
So you just kind of be in the office sort of all day and see what volume
in the shadows. That's where that comes from, right?
Yeah. For like a week, we'd go down and visit him, and he'd take me to the office.
And was this your mom was like, guess what? You're shadowing Grandpa, or was it? You know what I mean?
Did you
like
want
an assignment, or did you ask?
When your parents want you to do anything, there's resistance. Sure. I think internally you feel this pressure, and it makes you kind of want to resist and rebel. But I saw how much he enjoyed what he was doing, and it seemed like a noble profession. So they weren't dragging me kicking and screaming. Okay, I'm also kind of a pleaser for my parents, so I went to kind of keep them happy. Yeah, and I really enjoyed it. It seemed like a good field, and so kind of went through high school with that kind of notion in mind that I was going to be a doctor. There was a lot of people in our high school that were going to be doctors.
Yeah.
I remember getting through high school, starting undergrad. There was probably, I want to say like at least 20 people at UF that were going to be doctors, and by the end of undergrad, the weed out process had occurred.
Sure.
And people went different routes, and there was maybe 2 or 3 of us left.
Yeah. Huh.
So was it sort of wanting to follow in your grandfather's footsteps, or something along those lines that kind of was in the back of your mind all throughout that process? And so even in med school, you were like, well, I want to go do essentially what he was doing, kind of the jack of all trades route.
Where it really kind of ironed things for me was at his funeral. We went, he passed away when I was just about to start, like I was in the application process for med schools, and we went to his funeral.
Wow.
And, I knew he had made an impact there, but I didn't realize until being at his funeral, there was just, probably 300 people there, and, people shaking, our hands, as they were leaving, and just kind of telling my mom stories and me stories about, what he did for them, or their dad or their sister or brother. And so that was wow, man, there's not many, unless you're like a, politician or movie star or whatever, you don't have that kind of
test prep too.
Yeah, feedback.
Oh, sure,
too. Really absolutely. Podcast.
You're gonna have to book
runners for sure.
Podcast with a couple of brothers.
Yes, for sure. At least 300. Not a bad.
No, but that must have been very clearly
where you
that impacted you heavily.
Yeah, it did. It kind of helped me realize this is what I should be doing.
And were there times, I'm under the impression that med school's kind of hard. So were there times during that process when you thought back to that, or did you need to use it to motivate yourself sometimes, or not really? Was that not really how it worked?
I think it wasn't something that was constantly on my mind, but it was something that, when
kind of understood this.
Yeah. Once I was on that track, it was going to happen. And when I say weed out in undergrad, I don't mean the people weren't good enough. It's just a matter of how committed.
It's kind of a gut check thing, because I've seen people go through it. I have a lot of friends who wanted to be doctors, and they didn't all decide that. And it's like you say, it's not just that you can't necessarily. It's more that you realize this isn't quite what I thought it was. Right. I like this other field more, maybe, or absolutely.
Yeah.
Does that weeding out, so to speak, still happen in med school itself, or?
There were a few people that, there was maybe 200 people in my class, and we graduated with 180. So, there's some weeding out that occurs, and, social situations arise in someone's life, or,
sure.
Realizing it's just not for them, or, family crises, something like that can derail the plan. But for the most part, everybody that was there in the beginning made it
through.
Yeah.
I was just trying to think why the phrase weed out has such a negative connotation, but it's because of the word weed. Once the weeds are taken out, we should use a different kind
the least desirable version of something.
Yeah. All those human weeds.
The worst plant.
So, do you, you described this early impact of your grandfather and everything, is that something that affected your brothers? Are your brothers following that path?
So the youngest, there's 4 brothers. The 2 in the middle the heat was off of them. They had fulfilled the quota.
Sibling draws a lot of fire. I don't think the younger siblings realize.
Yeah, you understand.
Like how much.
Yeah, they stopped caring by the last one.
Yeah, you do whatever you want. Yeah, we got what we need.
Yeah. But it's funny. The second one is an attorney now. Just
the other
passed bar.
acceptable profession, or
Yeah,
one of the
the other
others.
acceptable one.
One thing
The
he
third
Does he
one
feel
was
like being on a podcast?
we'll talk.
Is he busy right now?
Yeah. The third one was the artist of the family. He's making video games.
Oh, awesome!
Which was like something my dad like couldn't fathom.
Yeah,
and didn't
it's
understand.
a type of engineering, and
Yeah,
I mean, you're
it's
creating
awesome.
a thing
Yeah.
to solve a problem.
It's really cool.
That's really
He wants to work
cool.
for Nintendo, and he's kind
Who
of
doesn't,
on
man?
the path.
Yeah. Maybe he'll meet Mario.
The fourth brother we didn't hear about.
The fourth brother.
Yeah, the youngest. So he was going to be the engineer. He actually did an intern summer with an engineering company, and well, I guess I'll rewind it a little bit. He wanted to be a doctor, and then my father got sick. He got cancer when I was in residency, and my youngest brother was kind of there throughout everything, all the cancer treatments and the rehospitalizations and so forth, and was there in hospice. And I think it scared him. Like he got like cold feet about medicine. He didn't want to be in a hospital anymore. So he went to the other field, engineering. And he's really good at math. And he just figured that'd be a good fit. And then he worked at an engineering office for full summer, and he hated it. It was just, he said for what he was doing, it was just kind of dry. And,
Was he in college at this point?
Yeah, UNF. Yeah. So then he called me and he's like, I think I want to be a doctor again. So now he's doing pre-med, and he's
That's kind of cool. I respect a lot when someone, first of all, is willing to like actually investigate, what it is that they think they want to do, because that's the best way to find out, obviously, if you actually like it. But then also to be willing to say, I was committed to this thing, gave it a decent, shot, had some decent exposure to it. Don't really like it. Let me try this, and just to kind of keep moving forward like that is something that a lot of people would just feel trapped in whatever thing that.
Yeah, like I started doing this,
and then they
I'll
just
look
stick to
stupid
it.
if I don't. Or something.
And so that's impressive for him.
The number one reason most students struggle with tests like the SAT and the ACT is that they try to attack those tests using skills that would work in a classroom setting. But the SAT and ACT are very different from tests you normally take in school. In fact, the single most important skill across all sections of both tests is careful reading. If you're interested in learning more about the most effective way to prepare for the SAT and the ACT, search for the SAT Prep Black Book 2nd Edition and the ACT Prep Black Book 2nd Edition on Amazon.com.
You kind of touched on something that is, I think, extremely uncomfortable, at least for non-doctors. Maybe also for doctors, I don't know, but it's something in my experience with tutoring clients and their families. Obviously, a lot of the kids that you work with want to go on to be doctors. It's a pretty prestigious field. I don't know if they all recognize the extent to which, frankly, like human misery and death and that kind of thing, like is sort of around the profession.
You're around sick people and worried families.
I don't mean that in, what I mean? It's a thing in our society. We don't really talk about that process as a thing. And I imagine it's something that you must have seen many, many times. Any doctor probably has seen it.
Yeah.
A lot of times. Do you think, could you speak a little bit, if you're okay with it, to how that has been for you, and if you think that it has played any kind of role in possibly weeding people out or diverting people into other professions, or if you think or disagree with me that maybe people should be made more aware of it when they're younger and considering the profession. Just, I didn't mean to get so heavy, but you brought it up and it's kind of on my mind, so yeah.
It's important. I think that in the weeding out process in undergrad, it's the reason that it happens is because they throw a lot of courses at you that have nothing to do with being a doctor. Truthfully, organic chemistry, I hated biochem. physics, 3 and 4. It just is not things that you're using. You're not
like
ever
building
having
catapults and
right.
stuff.
Right. Not yet. Maybe
launch
one day.
like an organophosphate towards
We gotta hit that guy right in the mouth.
Right.
This is gonna be hard. Yeah. Thank God for this physics class.
Good thing I have my books. So,
Yeah.
So I mean, they throw these classes at you, and the purpose is to just see how much you want it. And nothing I really enjoyed. The first, like, the only patient interactions I was having was through my grandfather and volunteering at the VA in Gainesville. But in terms of that, I think the later on, the weeding out that you're talking about when it comes to death and suffering and seeing misery, that would occur more in perhaps in medical school. If you're, now you're being kind of entrenched in the hospital setting.
Like in residency or
yes.
Or,
well, med school, you're going to be doing rotations. Third and fourth year, you're going to be rotating out in different specialties and seeing what you like, and making hopefully relationships with program directors to get in a residency somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
But I do remember when I started residency in Chicago, internal medicine residency. That first few months, I was it's like this barrage of sick. And you're trying to stamp out disease, and it just keeps coming. The job is never done. You get someone well, there's 3 more with worse conditions. And I remember telling my program director, like, I was coming up 3 months straight of difficult rotations to start residency, and I was like, there was a kind of a vacation coming up, and I remember telling him, I was like, I'm exhausted. Like, it's kind of like overwhelming this dealing with sick people. It's going to be nice to be away from sick people for a while. So. And taking that that time off and kind of seeing if I mean, that could have been a weed out point for me. Truthfully.
Yeah, it sounds like you're maybe on the brink a little bit. Yeah.
I haven't really thought of that since it happened, but I remember that conversation. He wasn't like necessarily like very pleased that I was having those thoughts.
Yeah,
but coming back and there's a point where you have to be able to leave the room, and kind of move on, and keep going.
And I don't think that means. I think to a lot of younger people hearing this, that might seem cold or detached, but it's actually you have to do that so that you can help the other people. Like,
are you
right or no?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you don't want to be cold and detached in the room, but you have to be empathy is so important. You have to share that with them, but you have to be able to let it go and not bring it with you to the next case or the next day.
Are you trained in that? Like, when you become a doctor somewhere, that's that part of your training at any point, or is it just kind of like on the job that you just through repetition or something?
I think it's an on the job kind of situation. Hopefully you're learning under attendings that have that skill, and you're
like the individual people you're working with might offer advice related to that, but it's not like everybody gets an auditorium and like here's how to carry on kind of thing.
And it's funny because it should be. I think it's important, and it's brushed over in med school. It's an important skill to have develop empathy and dealing with end of life situations are challenging, and a lot of times you're thrown in your first family meeting and you've never done it before, and a grandfather that's on their last days, and you're deciding between hospice and peg tube and kind of routed. But I think for me, I tried to take a bad situation in my dad's illness and use it to my advantage. When you're on the other side of the door, and you're waiting for the answers, and you're waiting for someone to come tell you what's the plan. And, that's really the only true way to develop that empathy. I keep using the word. But so going through that experience, actually being in hospice and seeing what it's like, and seeing what a good doctor looks like and what a bad doctor looks like, and waiting all day for answers. That is a skill or a experience that I'm trying to use in my practice, and it's important.
Sure. Wow. Thank you for discussing that. Yeah. You mentioned something too when you were differentiating between like the sort of academic weeding out versus the experiential, weeding out that comes later. One thing, like I briefly entertained, like briefly as in maybe for a day, entertained, the possibility of going into medicine when I was in high school. And I read a book called Morphine, Ice Cream, and Tears. I don't know if you ever heard of it. It was
oh man, it's
it's really something.
Quite something. It's
and
really fascinating.
It was written
like the 80s.
I think the 70s or 80s.
Notepad.
Oh, there you go.
Look at that.
Oh, you might use it.
Yeah.
Good notes.
Yeah.
So
It sounds like it's morphine ice cream, but it's morphine, ice cream.
morphine ice cream.
Morphine ice cream. It was the 70s, man. I mean, it was a crazy time.
Poppy seeds.
No, it's actually morphine, ice cream, and tears.
Yeah.
No, so it was the memoir or something of a guy who worked in an ER. I want to say in New York City, a major city.
Yeah, it was in
the
Manhattan,
70s or 80s.
Yeah.
Can't remember. And it was about his experience, like how he started out very idealistically. And this is obviously like pre-internet. There's a lot more openness now in terms of every profession, I think. And he had an idea of what it was to be a doctor. And in the memoir, it didn't exactly work out that way. In many instances, his experience and the help that he was able to give and the positivity of it was overwhelming. I mean, it's not that it was always bad, but some of the bad stuff, he was like, no one told me anything like this was ever going to be, possible. And I'm not saying that it's like that now. Obviously, I have no idea. He might also have made it up for the memoir. I have no way to know. But one thing that he mentioned that I do have sort of other confirmation is is the idea that when you're a first year person out of med school and like working in the hospital, that everybody's like kind of mean to you and they make you stay up like
hazing-ish.
It is. It sounds a lot like
yeah.
hazing. And the best explanation I've ever been able to find for why you would do that is just that someone did it to you. And like this is just how it works. And there's apparently been a lot of studies showing statistically that it's bad for patients that doctors, I don't know if they even are still put through it, but that they were put through it. The patients suffered because sleep-deprived doctors are making bad decisions and, all that kind of stuff. So, A, is that still a thing in any kind of capacity? And B, I have this impression that it's sort of gradually getting better, but I don't know. And as someone who actually knows, could you tell us what's going on?
It's funny
with
you bring that up. I was sitting in the doctor's lounge last week, and I was at a table with a bunch of surgeons, different kinds of surgeons, a urologist, a cardiac, and they were all kind of, I was the only medicine guy there, but they were all kind of exchanging war stories of residency. And one of them is probably in his 70s now. One of them's in his probably 40s.
Oh, wow.
And they were all, kind of telling me about the, surgeons kind of typically are known to have it worse in residency than we do. But they were all, sharing these, experiences of being up for 3 days and that kind of thing, and just the amounts of patients they'd have to see, and just sounded pretty tough for all of them. There was a case, I believe, and I need to verify and look it up, but I believe it was in New York where a resident or an intern fell asleep during an operation, and there was a bad outcome.
Sure.
And I want to say it was in the 90s or early 2000s, but that kind of, that news kind of went out to all the residency programs, and they realized they needed to reevaluate. And I'm sure they looked at data like you're expressing about it being bad for patients. So these days, fortunately, there's a lot more policing that goes on in terms of hours you're allowed to work straight and so forth. Just like the rest of society, medicine's getting softer.
Sure,
medical training's getting softer, and some of the older docs don't like it, and they think that that leads to worse doctors. But I disagree. I think there's a way to learn and to get conditioned for what's coming without it being over the line and dangerous.
Yeah. Well, also what we know, I don't know it. What people say they know about sleep deprivation shows it's not a thing that you can like condition yourself to beyond a certain point. Like there's not an infinite capacity to
get better
just
at
working
operating.
Deprived, right?
Yeah.
Like at some point, like this poor person, and the poor patient that was being worked on, at some point, you have to hit the limit. Just like truck drivers can't drive 100 hours in a row. There's a limit to what you can do, or high school students can't, pull all-nighters 3 nights a week forever. Like,
You tried, but
I did try. It's one of the ways I know that you can't.
First.
But yeah, and thank you again for talking about that. So now that we've talked about all the negative things, which was not, it wasn't my goal, it just sort of happened. Could you touch on maybe some of the most positive, experiences? I mean, obviously you seem like a very positive person. You chose this career, you're committed to it. I'm assuming you're quite good at it. You're good at everything else I know about with you. So what are the
good?
Yeah.
Well, I talked to my youngest brother who decided to go back in the
medicine. What did you say to him when that conversation
happened? And when he told me that, because I've kind of become a father figure, his dad's gone. So he came to me and kind of like I would go to my dad to say like, hey, I want to change majors and that kind of thing, and not sure how I'd react to that,
Sure.
him kind of changing course, and it would be extra time in college and that kind of thing. But I was so happy for him because, I mean, I don't think there's another field that can give you that fulfillment. And it's not every time. It's not like every case you're going in and it's just wonderful, doctor, thank you, you saved mom, that kind of thing. I mean, there's maybe one of those out of 10, and some weeks one of those out of 20, but you're still gonna get those moments where you kind of close the door, you leave the room, and like you got the tears in your eyes, kind of like Office, off the show, like there's those little moments where you like feel like really great, and just one of those every 20 can fill your tank for a few more hundreds, however many it may be. But so the being a part of those situations, and it's not always like you saved my mom. It's some of those situations, it's helping a family decide between, I had a case, this elderly guy who's 95, and he suffered a massive stroke and kind of wiped out his whole right side, and the outlook was pretty grim, and he wasn't able to make decisions for himself. So, having a family meeting. This was a few weeks ago. We had a family meeting with the care manager there, myself, and the GI doctor who would be he couldn't swallow for himself, so there was a procedure that he was going to need a feeding tube kind of surgically inserted into his stomach to keep him alive because he couldn't eat on his own. And kind of the fork in the road was to put that feeding tube and send him, to a nursing home for quote unquote rehab, or to allow hospice to intervene and to kind of make sure he was comfortable and offer him pleasure feedings, that kind of thing.
And sorry, just for members of the audience who may not know, because it's come a couple of times, hospice is sort of medical care where the goal is just to comfort and physically
end of life care,
like avoiding
the person
pain,
comfortable.
But correct me if I'm wrong, when you go to hospice, you're not coming out like the idea.
You're no longer trying to resolve the medical issue. You're
limiting aggressive
realizing
interventions, anything painful. You're not doing blood work. You're not doing any needles or anything that necessarily is going to cause them any pain or suffering. It's when you typically a patient has likely less than 6 months or has a terminal condition of some sort. Not being able to swallow can be a terminal condition if you're not able to eat and drink. So they would be involved, and there's a lot of misconceptions about hospice. The reason I bring up that family meeting is because sometimes it's making sure you're acting in the best, making sure the family is navigating through these difficult decisions.
Feel like they have the right information,
right?
They're making the best decision they can make,
and the goal has always got to be to do what the patient would want if he could wake up and tell you. And so helping them through that, and they ultimately decided to go with hospice, but I received an email from kind of our medical director who had heard from the family and that he had passed, and just wanted to thank me for taking the time for the conversation and for doing what ultimately he would have wanted. So even in cases like that, there can be kind of a sense of fulfillment because you're helping people through a tough thing.
And that's again the sort of thing that you never had a class about that, right? I mean, that's just like an on the job, like you're in that moment. And
that reminds me, a friend of Patrick's gave a TED talk. Actually, he's a an MD as well, and he used the phrase. He said something like, "Being a doctor or working in a hospital or something like that was like a backstage pass to the human condition. You just like see everything, and you see it like
playing out,
up front
rooms all
and
timed, kind of,
and it's real. I mean, I hate to say, like, we live in a world where so many things are on TV or they're faked for Instagram or whatever, but like this is actually real. These are real people.
Yeah,
it's
well put. I like that. I might take
that. Steal it. I stole it from him.
It's mine now.
Steal it from him.
I wonder, tagline.
I wonder who he stole it from.
Dr. Seuss.
But yeah, that's really something. Sorry, I just glanced over at the note you wrote, and it is the stereotypical.
Dr.
Oh wait, no, it's not as bad as I thought.
No, it's not too bad.
Okay, sorry.
It's better than my handwriting.
Never mind. Take it back. So you mentioned something else earlier too. You referred to the idea that your grandfather kind of did everything. And I think you used the phrase back then. I wrote it down as something that you said. So you said like back then, they did it all. My impression from speaking to doctors and just sort of as an outside observer is that over time, the field has become way more specialized, softer, you said, in a sense. I think this kind of goes with that. And also not more regulated. I think that's the wrong term, but there seems to be a much bigger reliance now on what the guidelines say you have to do.
Like processes and
being concerned about like insurance issues and legalities, which I think maybe like 3 generations ago, it seems that doctors...
Like his experience probably did not include nearly so much of that.
Right. Is that an accurate reflection? Can you sort of address your thoughts on that?
So I do remember towards the tail end of his practice in the late 90s, he was getting kind of disgruntled with the way medicine was going. He was being forced to take on a lot of medical malpractice coverage, and it was kind of exorbitant. It was to the point where he decided to go uncovered because it wasn't financially feasible for him to.
So it would have been cheaper to get sued, lose the lawsuit, and like that was a better prospect than continuing.
Right. Than paying for this coverage.
Yeah.
So that was one of the things that frustrated him. The fact that things were becoming more electronic rather than paper charts. As an older physician, it was tough for him to adapt to the technology. That part of it I love. I think that it's important. Paper charts had to go away.
Sure.
It was time.
Well, think how much information must have been lost or whatever, and now that won't happen, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Ideally.
Right.
Having this is maybe too advanced for this, but having the different hospital systems, electronic medical records talk is kind of the current frustration. Is
sure.
So within the hospital, it's got a system that works, but it can't
and that's I think by design of the companies that make
the software.
That's an interesting point.
Software.
Yeah.
So hopefully one day we can get to that point. But he was able to do it all because he wasn't dealing with you go down the street and look at the billboards and it's all about people holding checks with how much money they made suing a doctor. So we're in a different environment than he practiced in, and that's why things are more specialized. Because God forbid if you're a primary care doctor and you're delivering a baby and something goes wrong, you can hear the attorney's voice. Well, doctor, how many babies do you deliver a year? This isn't your thing. So
I never thought about
that's why as primaries we're kind of forced a lot of times, and it does rack up cost. The more consultants you have in the case, the more expensive the case is. But you have to unfortunately
send people
protect
to specialists, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's defensive medicine.
Huh? Is that like an established term?
Mm-hmm.
Or that's interesting. Kind of
the other day, I took my child. I don't wish to say the name of my child on this recording, but I took the child to the doctor. And I thought that the child might have an issue like a lazy eye. I guess a lot of babies are born with something like that, and it resolves itself eventually. And I said to the doctor, do you think that this is a thing? And he's a very nice guy, very relaxed. And he goes, well, it doesn't matter what I think. We have to send her to her. We have to send the child
50-50.
Well, that could be like a ruse, though. You could have, I'll say her and act like that's right.
That's true. That's what it was. Anyway, we have to send the
Call
child
the baby Larry
to a specialist, like a whatever the word is in
Ophthalmologist.
Yeah, but like for babies, I guess is a thing. I don't know.
Micro ophthalmologist.
Yeah. But yeah, and my mother-in-law was with us, and afterwards she was like, "Well, why couldn't he just say if he thinks it's a problem or not?" And I didn't know, but I was like, "My guess is he can't be the one who wrote down that it is or isn't a problem. Like someone who is qualified to judge that kind of thing has to be the person who says."
If God forbid, if your child's eye didn't get better,
little Larry.
Well, yeah, little Larry, he continued to have that problem. Then down the road, he would.
There's some record of
Wow. Huh. Do you get training in that aspect of things, in the legalities and liabilities and that sort of stuff?
Not really, no. And it's something that would also, be great to have. And it's surprising, in Dr. Lunch's, how much of it goes on. As a general rule, if you're personable and your patients like you, you're much less likely to get sued.
Yeah. Sure.
However, personable, likable colleagues of mine have gone through it, and it's a tough thing to swallow.
Wow.
I know a ER physician that I work with. He said he was sued, named in a lawsuit, and it was kind of a ridiculous case, but he said that it affected the way he practiced. He started viewing patients as potential plaintiffs.
Yeah,
and,
I can imagine.
I mean, it's only reasonable.
That's obviously it's not why you get into this, and hopefully I'm not turning a bunch of people off of medicine because but it's one of the things that you have to be aware of. It's and I think any field you're in. I mean, my father-in-law is an engineer, and he tells me, they're always dealing with lawsuits and that kind of thing too, no matter what you're in.
And I, as a law school dropout, I would like to say, maybe, I don't know if you agree or not, there are times when a doctor is like just flatly negligent and someone suffers because a doctor did something they shouldn't have done.
Right.
Or an engineer builds a thing knowing that, or says a thing ought to be built knowing that it's not actually done correctly. Or it's not that these things should never exist to me, but it's that there are so many times when a case does exist that it really ought not to. Like, is that?
That's absolutely correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
There are cases when wrong was done and a patient suffers harm, and those cases absolutely. I mean, we should have the system in place, but it gets abused.
Sure. Yeah. Huh. Well. Did you know that every math question on the SAT or the ACT can be answered in under 30 seconds if you find the fastest possible solution? Now, you don't have to answer each math question in under 30 seconds, of course. You can still get questions right by using longer solutions. And in fact, that's what most people do when they get a question right on those tests. But approaching standardized math questions in that way takes a lot more time, causes a lot more frustration, and greatly increases the likelihood of making a mistake that will cost you the question. In short, it's harder overall, and it usually results in lower scores. And it's absolutely true that if you find the shortest solution for any math question on an official SAT or ACT, that solution will take less than 30 seconds, sometimes as little as 10 seconds or even less than that. Those kinds of faster solutions are much easier to implement and generally lead to significantly higher scores with less overall mental effort once you know how to do them. If you'd like to learn more about this idea, keep listening for the special segment at the end of this episode. And for more on the SAT and the ACT, head over to questprep.com or search for the SAT Prep Black Book or the ACT Prep Black Book on Amazon.com. Thanks. There were a couple of other things. Basically, every time you talk, I think of things I want to ask you. One of them, you mentioned the technology, things going digital and so on. Have you seen any kind of expansion of like artificial intelligence or virtual reality or any of those kinds of things in maybe the way data is analyzed or the way patients are given therapy or any kind of thing like that?
So I think just like every field that we're facing that, and I think doctors are a little more protected than if you're a banker or something else, but certainly it's something that we have to be aware of, and it's helpful, but it can also take your job one day. I know that for radiologists, for example, every hospital used to have a few radiologists on site to look at X-rays and that kind of thing. Now you're able to outsource that So there's
that's a good point. It's not only AI and things like that, like a machine doing it, but it's also that you can
being done remotely or
send that digitally.
Somebody in Australia, I heard, was reading an X-ray for us recently. India. I mean, anywhere that they can have a computer and a radiologist can be doing those. Wow. So it's something to be mindful of when you're choosing your field.
And what about like remote surgery? Is that
So I know that
heard, exists, but
it's not something that I see very often in my cases here, but I know it exists. Remote surgeries where a surgeon is thousands of miles away on a robot, and the patient's getting operated on. I'm sure that it's not imminent that that's going to be happening in every hospital, but in 20 years could be.
Yeah.
Huh.
Wow. Another aspect of technology that we see is we're seeing like doctors on iPads like wheeled into the room. For example, if we have a patient that's having a stroke.
Oh, like FaceTime kind of thing? Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. I was like, doctors on iPads.
So sometimes, for feasibility's sake and time's sake, and also I'm sure the hospital's bottom line, having if a patient's having something emergent and needs a doctor right then, they can wheel in the iPad and a neurologist can make an assessment if someone's having a stroke.
Wow.
The neurologist will do the interview by iPad, FaceTime.
Wow. And does that, is there someone else in the room with the neurologist to say hey, so-and-so, can you please try to move his arm?
Yes, there's always a nurse present that's trained in that.
So it's not just so-and-so.
Exam. Yeah. Right.
As soon as I said that, I was like, that's a little more professional than that.
Right. It is. There's someone there helping kind of conduct the exam portion of things, because at the end of the day, you got to touch the patient.
Yeah.
Sure.
But that's another aspect, and for good and bad. I mean, there's a lot of doctors that are able to practice at home in their pajamas, and they like it, and it works out for them. But it's something to be mindful of. If they can do that, then they can perhaps do what I do.
Yeah, sure. You mentioned also nurses. To what extent? There's a phrase that I've heard my doctor friends use, which is a physician extender. So, in the way that and I can please tell me where I'm wrong on this, but my understanding is that in the way that a hospital is run, or any kind of center like that is run, you have the doctor, and then increasingly you have nurse practitioners and other highly trained nurses, pharmacists, those kind of people who are able to take on more and more of the decision-making capacity, so that if one doctor before could do X patients in an amount of time, now with the physician extenders around the doctor, they could do 10 or 20X. Is that a thing? Yeah, can you just discuss that? And
so, nurse practitioners and physician assistants, they are physician extenders, and they, a lot of times I'm, as the primary doctor, I have a physician extender at night, a PA that covers my night shifts, and she calls me if there's any issues. She does admissions and takes care of my patients at night. She does a fantastic job. I trust her wholeheartedly, and so that obviously is less expensive for the hospital than hiring a nocturnist, a nighttime version of myself. It obviously helps the doctors out quite a bit. They're able to cover more ground, see more patients that way. And I have experiences with cardiologists who have ARNPs, and now a lot of the surgeons, they'll have a PA that's kind of on site doing the notes and seeing patients while they're in, so they can do more surgeries and not have to necessarily do so much note writing and documenting. And they're getting more and more responsibilities. I think that one of the things that kind of separate physicians from them is the ability to prescribe narcotics, which may be an advantage for them, because they don't get, they don't have to deal with
liability wise, they don't have
drug seeking type behaviors and so forth. But there's word that could be coming, where they have the ability to do that as well.
That's interesting. When you mentioned that there's word coming, is that from professional groups, or
just kind of the
doctors just hang out together?
The rumbles our locker room talk.
We just before this, David took us into this secret doctor lounge area that I never knew existed, where there was unlimited peanut M&Ms.
That's where we're going to stop after this.
Exactly.
They get their message out. It's written very small.
Right. Yeah, that was outstanding. I was going to ask, changing topics a little bit, to less what you're doing right now and more getting back to when you were, elementary school, middle school, high school. You mentioned that you had a lot of, as you said, positive pressure in the direction of doctorhood. So do you remember growing up being aware that like education was important in your family, like that your parents were telling you to do the best you can do? What was your general sense early in life?
And the only other podcast that we've done, I also interrupted Patrick at this point to
That's
say
true,
something.
yeah. Wait a minute.
No, but just because we are, maybe thought of as people who like sort of represent the idea that high school and college and testing and all that stuff is super important. Please don't sugarcoat or water down.
Give us the unvarnished.
Yeah, if you didn't feel like it was that important, or if particular, like, please just be. Yeah. The goal here is to be honest and transparent about the high school and college experience, because frankly, there's not a lot of honesty and transparency around it. So
everybody feels like, well, this is what I think, but
this is what I probably should have done.
It's better for me to say this, so I'll say that.
But we would like to know, like, you're obviously a successful professional person. We would like to hear your specific, and just as you've been for the rest of the discussion, what you actually really think about that.
Sure.
So please don't feel like you need to.
I'll first say that the SAT is not important at all.
People who worry about it.
Any preparation for that is a waste of time.
And I gotta go. Let's end on that.
I'm just gonna drop. No. Okay, so having my dad and mom, but less so, had very high expectations on grades. It was all A's.
Like as far back as you remember?
As far back,
even
elementary school, first grade, and I remember second grade, I was starting to veer off and getting in trouble and kind of becoming kind of a class clown type figure, and was lying about my grades to my parents.
Wow.
And not realizing that the report card was going to come.
Sure.
I was 9, so.
And it came, and it wasn't good, and there was some life-changing intervention. I don't know if we're allowed to talk about that.
Wow.
Yeah, but it was important. It was a fork in the road for me, and it got me back on the right track. And all A's was the expectation, and
that's really
if there was B, it was what happened.
Was there? This is something I'm always curious about. Like, you are clearly a very intelligent person. Do you think that you're like lucky and it was coincidental that you are inherently intelligent and then you were able to get all these A's, or do you think that there was a role where the family pressure / encouragement sort of directed you to up your intelligence? You know what I mean? Or is there necessarily even a connection in second grade between intelligence and grades? Like, who knows necessarily? But what are your thoughts on that?
Are you saying like a nature versus nurture of intelligence?
Kinda, yeah. Like, let's say, for example, you just had tried really, really hard and just never got straight A's. What do you think would have been the outcome there?
Like with your parents? Like
yeah. I'm just hypothesizing, curious. Yeah.
I think in general, to a degree, it helps to have smart parents and hopefully get some of those genes. But for me, it was more kind of roll up your sleeves and work hard. Like in high school, I wasn't in some of the prep schools like Darnell or James Weldon. Mm-hmm. So I going to Stanton, which was a pretty tough school in an IB program, I remember feeling really overwhelmed. That first year, I just felt like I was drowning. And there's kids that I thought they were a lot smarter than me, present company included, that it just came so natural. It was just so easy. Yeah. And I had to, for me to learn, I have to kind of write things down. And, in med school, I was, traveling around with a bunch of pens and drawing out anatomy to kind of understand it.
Wow.
Other people, I remember, one kid, he just cruised into the test. It was his first time going through the material, that night. he was finishing up the last page right as we were walking in the test, and we got the same grade, even though I had gone through it 4 times and written it down to the point of calluses. And so, if you have to kind of look at yourself and realize, what your limitations are, what is your learning, style and capabilities, and figure out what's going to get the job done,
and then just embrace it. That makes a ton of sense.
So that started then, like you said, elementary school, got to high school, which was apparently like a bit of a shock to the system, given that the school was so rigorous. At what point, I guess we already established you kind of knew you wanted to be a doctor. That was sort of in the back of your mind. At what point in that progression did you start thinking specifically about college and applications and essays and like all that kind of stuff? Or were you just sort of like, well, it doesn't matter, I'll eventually go to law school? Oh, that was me. Medical school anyway, whatever school. How did you weigh those priorities, and what did you think about it at that time?
We were kind of lucky where we went to school in that it was something that was like at the forefront of discussion, from beginning of freshman year.
For context, we went to a magnet school that was just sort of like, magnet is a good visual of just sucking all the nerd kids all around town into one area.
Nerd magnets.
Right.
So like, as you said, the expectation kind of for everybody was like, of course, you're working toward going to college and whatever.
It was the culture. I mean, everybody was talking about where they wanted to go, and it was something that you kind of got sucked into. And
for better or for worse, sometimes a lot of people feel
not a bad thing. I had friends that went to public schools that I would have gone to had I just kind of continued on. And I fought my parents about
our school is also public. It should be added as well, just for
that's true. The local school,
but the non-magnet school versus magnet schools.
And me and my parents had a argument about whether I got an acceptance letter
going to Stanton or not?
To that school, the magnet school, and kind of out of the blue, I guess I had done well on a test in middle school, and they reached out to me, and my parents were like, "You're absolutely going to this school." It was number 1 in the country at the time, and on some ranking.
Newsweek.
And
Newsweek. We were all it was Newsweek.
Circa
some ranking.
Which time was it magazine?
Everybody's like Newsweek.
People used to read a magazine.
They used to print out information and distribute.
Believe it or not, people used to pay to have paper delivered to their house, and the paper had pictures of people.
Now we know that paper is just garbage. There's no reason to do that. We've learned that. Anyway, so it was number 1.
So they really wanted you to go, and you, it sounds like, were not super.
All my friends were going to be going to the local school, and that's where I wanted to go. And
sounds like some second grade class.
It was
coming back,
another fork in the
road.
And they won the debate.
I think it was rigged, but they
intended to. And looking back, I mean, a lot of those friends that I had are not really doing much anymore. Or got in trouble, somewhere along the line, and it's really a God send and a blessing that that happened, because I don't know that I'd gotten as far.
Sure. Was there did your parents convince you at all at that point, or was it just this is like was there a little bit in your mind like, okay, maybe they're right, or was it just you're doing this and you'll see later that it's right?
I think to an extent, I saw where they were coming from, and I read about the school.
You got their argument. You were more thinking about
right. It was just more for me at the time. It was more about my friends.
Yeah, sure.
And going to a place where I didn't know anyone, and this intimidation factor of everyone being smarter than me and at a different level than me and that kind of thing. So, and I think honestly that humility has helped me every stage. Like even when I got accepted to med school, I remember telling my parents this. I kept waiting, the first day orientation week. I kept waiting for the dean to walk in the room and be like, we made a mistake. You're out of here. That was looking for you.
Oh, we meant to admit David Lazarus. This is horrible.
So I think that, there's obviously a lot of some anxiety that comes with that, but I think it also kind of compels you to work harder.
It's an interesting point, like being in a community like that, because I often think that was like the most important education, like more than college or anything, like that community of people. And it was great teachers, but a lot of it was the kids you were around and the mentality. And like you said, you could kind of stand out in some ways and still see that like there's other kids doing other stuff that are like way better than, you know what I mean? Like, it's a good thing to see, like, and not be freaked out by it or intimidated or not feel like that means you can't try or whatever you do doesn't matter. Like there was a kid I remember in one of my in a French class, and he was like almost always asleep. Like he got Fs, like he did terribly. And he was like an international level like robotics whiz, and he was always asleep because he was up till 6 a.m. in his like lab or whatever,
Tony
like
Stark,
designing
basically.
robots. Yeah, exactly. And, like it's I don't know, it's a
Well, and I
thing to be able
think
to
that's an
understand,
interesting
to be
thing
around that.
now too, because one thing that the internet has done, for better or worse, in a lot of ways that it's not for better, is it has made you aware that no matter how good you are at something, there is someone.
I feel like that's a good thing if you can realize, like,
if you realize it. Absolutely.
It depends on how you take it.
But
if you let it intimidate you, and
I think at that younger
that can be a
age,
problem,
maybe I'm projecting, but I think for a lot of people, the idea that like I am uniquely talented, I'm the best football player in my school, I'm the best this, I'm the first chair in the orchestra for whatever.
Yeah.
I think you could
Becomes part
have
of your
that
identity,
feeling and believe that you were pretty good at something, like a long time ago. But now, whatever you
no
think
matter
you're
what
good
you
at,
do or how good you are,
there's someone who's at least as good as you.
But then with
just
the
out
internet
there.
too, there's all these like weirdly specific little skills that people like develop on their own.
That's
Like
true.
I saw a video of a guy doing flute beatboxing. It was incredible. Playing a flute
He
and
probably is the
beatboxing
best flute
simultaneously.
beatboxer.
Yeah. So it's like, however many before YouTube or whatever, I started to say the internet, and then I said YouTube, and I said before the YouTube. So I don't say the YouTube. I was just changing what I was saying.
Yeah, totally.
Anyway, so there wouldn't have been beatboxing flautists, but
Right.
now there are, and so it's interesting. Like you
Also,
said,
good
you
job
want to
saying
be.
flautist.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
The best at something. Well, you better make up a new
Yeah.
thing. You know what I mean?
But that-
and then also get good at it because somebody else is going to do it too. Yeah.
But that also, like you said, it is good, and as you both said, good to have that humility and to be aware that like life is still worth living, even though I'm not the single best person.
If you can recognize that everybody else is also intimidated,
right?
That's so comforting to me.
Yeah,
because I feel like I can come off very confident. I've been told that, but for me, it's less that I'm confident. It's more that I know everybody else is freaking out. Like, I'm secure in that knowledge that I have those feelings. And I'm like, you know what? Like a lot of people walk into a room for the first time and think, oh, everybody's looking at me, or I don't know what I'm doing, or I can't.
They also don't know what they're doing here.
Yeah, exactly. That's like a pretty universal feeling, and
and something that you touched on briefly as well was this idea of limitations and knowing your own learning style, your own, I think that that's such a critical thing to just to even be aware of. I think a lot of people, especially people who are sort of driven by their families to pursue a particular kind of career or whatever, they're kind of given the idea that they don't have any limitations. The limitations are for other people.
Or they shouldn't have
Or they
them.
shouldn't. Yeah, that's a better way to put it.
Figure out a way not to have it.
Right. Which is,
get back to me later about that.
Right, which is, I think, not possible. Or at least I've never met a person who was fully unlimited in every kind of way. So, so how did you, was it trial and error, or how did you come to have an idea of what you think your limitations are? And how do you decide which ones are things that ought to be worked on and which ones are things that, like, no, it's just kind of the way it is and I got to deal with that?
I think, from the beginning, you in processing information and studying for tests, you know what you can do, and you know what comes easy, what works and what doesn't. There's some people that are, visual learners. There's some people that have to write it down, and that was the case for me. I needed a lot of repetition to really hammer it home. So I think that self-awareness comes early, and I remember every year every time a new school year would start, the end of summer, kind of the blues of summer ending and the dread of going back to school. And every year I would kind of have that feeling and talk to my parents like, oh gosh, I don't know if I can handle 8th grade. They're going to be doing this and this and this. And I remember 3rd grade, they're going to be doing cursive and, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I remember my parents, my dad especially, would just tell me it's going to be the same. You're a better version of you.
Yeah, you have also grown.
Yeah. So just don't let it overwhelm you, and kind of all the way through med school, kind of carried that.
That's such an interesting point. Yeah,
because you're changing too. Otherwise, we'd start at 8th grade.
Yeah.
from the womb.
Exactly. And next year he'll be in 8th grade.
Why did they call it 8th? But it's the first
Exactly. And that's the origin of first grade.
Did you ever, in your practice, were you ever aware of other types of limitations? I don't know enough about medicine to suggest what some of them might have been, but were you ever aware of those kinds of things, and how do you address that?
I think that something we should definitely cover that can be a limitation for a lot of people, unfortunately, and it's only getting worse, is finances.
Please, yeah.
Of going to school at all.
Going to school, yeah.
I feel I felt more at ease talking about people dying. But that's how it's gotten.
Yeah.
Like, that is absolutely, and you're totally right. So yes, please, by all means, address that.
I don't have the exact data offhand, but just friends of mine that that have gone through it, that took loans out from the beginning, are in several $100,000 of debt. The most I've ever heard is in the 400s.
Yeah,
and that was someone that it took out loans for undergrad, kind of a private school, and then med school, and the cost is getting higher and higher every year. I remember my med school tuition would go up. It seemed like $5,000 every semester. And it was the same education. It wasn't like we were getting like
You're
a
not like
new
getting
robot.
your own helicopter.
Right. Yeah, it was just getting higher because that's what it is
now.
Yeah.
We're going to pay it.
Let's see if they pay it this semester.
I
did. Oh my god!
I really honestly
Look at
felt
these
like
guys.
these guys are idiots.
Do they know what dollars are? They just keep giving them to us.
That's its own discussion, but I think the schools bear a lot of the responsibility for that.
Well, I think also when I was younger, I remember there was sort of this idea that being a doctor was a very, very lucrative position. And I don't know, and I don't want to pry into your personal situation, but my understanding now is that either because it's now carrying so much debt, which it didn't really carry before, or because of so much malpractice insurance, or because a million other things, that it is not as lucrative, as it was in its heyday.
It might have been made out to be, especially for us when we were in elementary school, and everybody was like, "Oh,
yeah."
That was sort of like a golden option. Like, if you do this, then you're
right.
Good to go.
Which I think also, and this is something that the guy in Morphine, Ice Cream, and Tears mentioned, I believe. He mentioned that most people who went into the field really did love humanity, and they wanted to make sick people
that was
better.
Part of the motivation.
But there was a percentage of people who just wanted a way to make a lot of money and get like a lot of respect, from their communities.
Yeah.
And he talked about how that didn't always turn out great.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know, when I speak to people now who are in their teens and early 20s, especially if they don't have like a lot of doctors in the family or a lot of friends who are, doctors sort of in their orbit, their idea about the financial aspects of going to med school and then practicing, choosing a specialty, all that stuff, it doesn't seem to match up with what I hear from people like you who actually have done it recently. It just seems a little bit different.
So watching my grandfather, he kind of went through what he would call, and a lot of doctors now, older doctors will call kind of the golden era, where they were making a lot more money. The pharmaceutical company relationships with the doctors, they could take them on lavish vacations for weeks at a time, and kind of encourage them to prescribe certain medications. I mean, there's so many rules that we can't even get a pen at this point, anymore, because it's, and
we should probably
a lot of that
pen
is
back, just to be totally on me.
You can't have this pen either.
Well, I don't want to fall afoul of it. But so you can't take anything.
So I mean, there's that aspect, and then just the overhead. The malpractice that he was having to deal with, and then from a hospial setting.
Well, there's so much more technology now, and that in itself is so much more expensive, and everything is just more.
And then administrators, there's 2 to 3 administrators per doctor now, and so many different layers of making sure you're keeping up with compliance and changes in insurance companies, and there's roles developing every month. We're hearing about new titles that didn't exist before from an administration aspect. So when you have all that, and then you also have to keep in mind that during that golden era, it was kind of a fee for service model.
Sure.
Meaning, and not necessarily that was a good thing, but you could have a patient in the hospital, you can consult all your friends, and keep them in the hospital. The longer you kept them in the hospital, the more money you would make. And now, insurance companies have gotten wise to that.
Wait a second.
So now it's more about delivering efficient care and getting people in and out of the hospital as fast and safe as possible.
Sure.
Sometimes it's that's kind of a stressor for us.
Does it ever swing too far the other way, where you're
does.
pressured to let a person out and you don't think it's time?
No, you're never said, "Hey, you got to discharge this person." Ultimately, we're making the decisions, but we're judged on metrics.
Yeah.
You're judged next to your peers on how expensive your cases are, and how many consultants you bring on your cases, and how long they're in the hospital. So
if you're too far outside of whatever is the norm,
you're a bad doctor.
Wow.
So that's the metrics are a thing that how physicians are dealing with now that they weren't before. They were kind of autonomous to do what they needed to do, and not really worried about anyone looking over their shoulder.
Sure.
But in terms of how much money you can make, there are fields of medicine where you can still make more than $1 million a year, but those fields are getting smaller and smaller. They always said in med school it was the road to success. So radiology, but more so interventional radiology, guys that are doing procedures like you got a tumor in your kidney, they'll go and they'll do a biopsy
like
with
a
targeted biopsy with a CAT scan or ultrasound. So that's the R, the O, ophthalmologist, A, anesthesia, D, dermatology. There's a few others,
but they don't fit in the acronyms.
They didn't make the cut because it'd be too long of a
The
word.
roadblock.
The road gets
It's a fairly safe field where you don't have to necessarily worry about job security. Our population's getting older. We're always going to need doctors, but if you're going into it to make millions a year, there are less opportunities and types of doctors you could be than there were.
Do people in med school, in your experience, did they openly discuss this? Because you mentioned the road to success thing. Like, did people talk about finance and that?
Yeah, of course. In every field, every class, there's people that are there that's probably on their mind, and there were discussions like that. I wouldn't say it was like everybody talking about that. How much money they were going to make it, or what field they were going to go into for that reason. But certainly, there were people that that's what their mind was on, and they were going for that certain field, whatever it may be from day one.
Huh. Interesting.
Okay. So, jumping back still to the earlier thing, which, like your high school experience, and like Mike asked earlier, when you kind of shifted to thinking about getting into schools and scores and everything, do you remember being stressed out about getting a certain test score to get to a certain school? Like, did you have like I'm going to go to this school and it's going to go this way? Did you have like a path that you were kind of counting on, and was it stressful to get there, or did you not get there? What was that like?
So my goal was always to go to a med school relatively close to home. Persian culture, it's you got to be available. I would get a hard time from my more Americanized friends because I would go home every other weekend from Gainesville, Jacksonville, 2-hour drive.
Wow, really?
And I would still get heat from my dad that I wasn't.
That wasn't
going
enough.
home.
Really?
Yeah.
Half the time.
My other
Come home in
friends-
the afternoon.
So he's forcing you to be a doctor,
Right, exactly.
But while you're going to be a doctor,
Yes. and my friends would ask, like, what are you
because he
doing?
loves you, obviously. Like that's why. But, it's a funny thing. Yeah, go ahead.
They would ask, like, what are you doing? Like, what are you
Yeah.
group hugs? Like, why
It's
do
like
you
a
go
really
home so
important
much?
thing,
So it was important for me to, kind of go to school somewhere in Florida.
Sure.
I took the MCAT the first time, and there was 2 times, and I was going through a social situation where kind of went through a breakup like a week before my MCAT, and
Great
just
timing.
totally messed up my headspace. I remember sitting through like halfway through the test, rereading like the first paragraph again and again. Just nothing was sticking. I just knew. I walked out of the test. I knew I had to retake it.
Work. Yeah.
So after that experience, like the pressure was much higher in the preparation the second time around to number one, make sure I was learning this material. Number two, making sure absolutely nothing went wrong, which was even harder, just like blinders on. So yeah, I mean, I think, for me, especially like I was saying, every step of the way, not knowing if I was going to make it and not knowing if I was good enough, the testing was another aspect of that. And I wish I would have heard that quote from you before about like knowing that everyone else is freaking out, because that would have been helpful. you go in the testing room and you feel like everybody's
because also the more people are freaking out internally, they're just trying to stand there and like be normal and everybody else is looking at everybody else making the same like placid face and like is it MCAT time already?
Was there a specific score that you were shooting for? Were there specific tiers of programs you knew you wanted to get into? How much pressure? Or was it more like, well, as long as I do my best, I think I'll get in somewhere? Like, what was the...
So generally in terms of scores, for schools, what I think the audience should be aware of is certain scores. Every program has a score that's going to get your resume on the desk, and if you don't get on that score, usually, and they have different levels of what they're willing to tolerate and so forth. So that's number one, and that's why I think the testing is important and the grades are important, because that'll get you at least in the door for a potential interview. Yeah. Then you just got to not be a major weirdo, and that helps as well.
Or hide your major weirdo-ness for an hour.
At least just 30 minutes.
Just keep it together.
Keep it towards the tail end. So that's in terms of what score I wanted. I had a score in mind. I wanted for the MCAT a 30 was what I wanted. First time around, it wasn't close. Second time around, I got there.
Nice.
And so,
yeah.
So what about earlier, like when you were in high school looking toward college for that testing admissions situation? Was that similar in that, like you had a certain, SAT scores, whatever, or a certain school that was the school to go to, or, like what was that whole
for me,
like for you?
There wasn't as much pressure with the SAT. I just wanted to do well. I don't remember what well would have been, or if I had a number in mind, but my goal was to go to UF. It was close to home, and it had a med school, and it was one of the better schools in the state.
Did you go to med school at UF after?
No.
Okay. Sorry, did you know at the time? I think, now looking back, a lot of people who've been through all of their schooling recognize that it's normal to go to undergrad one place and somewhere else for whatever you do afterwards. But did you know as a teenager? Because you mentioned, UF had a med school. Like, really, strictly speaking, that shouldn't have played any role in your decision making, because you weren't going to necessarily go to that med school, or you could have gone after going somewhere else. But did you know that at the time, or
it would have been nice? At the time, that was kind of the goal, was to just stay there. We had a condo.
Okay. So that was the plan.
That was the plan. Yeah.
Sorry. Okay.
That would be pretty rare for someone to go to graduate school where they're going to undergrad. At least from the experiences of colleagues of mine, most people traveling.
Yeah.
And I think, looking back, I'm glad that I had experiences, outside of just one place for 8 years, because I think it kind of helps broaden your horizons a little bit, and just kind of have a clean slate and, meet new people and so forth.
Like a mind-expanding experience, kind of,
Exactly. I never planned to. I went to med school at Nova, which is in Fort Lauderdale, and that was never in my thinking growing up that I was going to live in South Florida. I always had kind of a negative connotation of South Florida for whatever reason, but I really enjoyed my time there. It was I had a great time, met great friends, and one thing I want to say is I kind of thought that as undergrad was winding down, that the fun was over, and that it was time to get serious. And I was serious, but I had a fun undergrad experience.
Sure.
But I was really surprised to find that med school for me was even more fun than undergrad was.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, that's surprising.
I the first year, not so much, but as after you get through that first year and you're not so much in the books and you're out in the hospitals, you're with kind of like-minded people that are kind of have similar goals as you and so forth. I mean, most of the people at my wedding were from my med school class.
Yeah.
It almost sounds like being on like an athletic team together. Like you're kind of going through this experience, and you're like physically working hard to like do your rounds and stay up late and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's exactly that experience, or being in the military together. That's kind of how I thought we were like doing our time together, and it was more fun because.
So when you say fun, was it like the kind of socializing, the same kind of socializing that you were doing as an undergrad, or was it more that like it actually you found the fun
like
in
the satisfaction of doing
training,
work that,
or like.
Both.
Okay.
Both. Cool. That's a good kind of fun. Yeah.
That is the best answer.
I had all of my
question.
fun needs fulfilled.
Just holistic fun. Right. Well, that's good.
You're doing, it confirmed for me that I was doing the right, the thing that I wanted. I didn't have that.
That's awesome. Yeah. That
sense of uncertainty of like,
you,
oh my God, I'm doing all this stuff. What if I hate it?
Yeah.
Now I was actually working in the hospitals, realizing, okay, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm enjoying it.
Well, and that kind of gets back to when you mentioned the shadowing. I didn't appreciate when I was younger and at the age that I might have been shadowing, not just for if I wanted to go to medical school, but just any kind of profession, that's a thing that you can do. I didn't realize that existed, and I think now when I look at the people that we've worked with, have or have not done those types of shadowing experiences, it's a great. Depending on the person that you're shadowing, how transparent they are and how accessible they are. But it's a great way to actually see, oh, this is the day-to-day life, like in this type of thing. Do you look for opportunities to let other people shadow with you, or is that really a thing you can do in your current role?
So it's funny you bring that up because the youngest brother that I talked about, who had the engineering veer in his path and now is interested in medicine again, he's shadowing me next weekend.
Oh, that's cool.
Cool. Yeah. So, and I've super excited about it. I've been talking to HR to get his badge and so forth, and I'm excited for him because I know like after his experience with my dad and so forth, I really feel strongly that after a couple of days of getting in it, he'll be fired up to like finish strong in undergrad and get the testing scores he needs to get in the door, because I think that his personality and he'll be a good fit.
Is there a way, if someone is listening to this, hopefully someone might, if anyone listening to this doesn't know how they could try to shadow a physician or some other professional, is there some kind of, I should know this but I don't, is there some kind of like body that they can go to, like someone who matches you up with people who would let you shadow them, or is it more of a personal network kind of a thing, going on LinkedIn? Like how do you find
there may be something out there.
I'll make a note to myself that I should
that
find out about
that is a good thing to look up, actually, because I'm not sure of it. Usually it's personal networking, personal relationships.
Sure.
You have an uncle, you have a family friend, a neighbor, and anybody can shadow any physician. It's pretty straightforward process, especially if they have their own practice. But if they're in the hospital setting, it's a matter of just working it out with HR and getting a badge. But I would say it's more rare for a physician not to have been shadowed than being shadowed. Yeah, when I'm walking around the hospital seeing physicians, you very, very frequently you're seeing somebody who's following them around and observing and so forth. So, and
if somebody wanted to shadow you, not that I'm suggesting people approach you specifically, but just for your...
What's your email address?
Yeah. Is there a way that request should be framed? Are there things that you would find out about someone and say, no, you can't shadow me because I don't trust you to be around patients, or is just some kind of thing like that? Is there any kind of filter there? I think that just generally being a approachable, nice person is generally going to get you in the door. Sure. Physician, there's, it's surprising. We're just like everybody else. It's no different than a lawyer or someone at a grocery store or whatever. Like you want to be around people that are pleasant to be around. Sure. That are on time. That's really the thing. Sorry. If you're on time, Mike. I showed up half an hour. If you're on time and you're not wearing shorts, then you're going to be totally fine.
You take it seriously, I'll take it seriously. That's all I'm saying.
Showed up late. I'm currently wearing shorts. No, but that's fair. That's a really good point.
I don't think there's any secret sauce to it. It's just
it's stuff everybody should know.
Just
when you have your own podcast, you live by different rules.
Yeah, exactly. So you mentioned, we talked about this earlier, that your normal schedule is, just to get in the, one thing we want to talk about is just the day-to-day life of a person in your position. So you have 7 straight days on and then off all the time, right? That's your normal deal.
But that's not necessarily everyone's normal thing. That's your normal arrangement.
So what's the hours like for those days? What's the...
Generally 10-hour, 12-hour days. They're long days. When But you get a week off every other week. 26 weeks off a year.
That's not bad at all. Yeah. And for the... Oh, sorry.
No, you're good for it.
For the... you mentioned is it a PA that you have overnight?
A nurse practitioner.
Nurse practitioner, sorry. Is that person also working
on your schedule?
So she's on my week. She's working those nights, about 12 hours each night. So there's a kind of a...
And does she have a week off then as well?
Yep.
So you're always working with the same... you just said it. Sorry, nurse practitioner overnight. So you're not really... You learn each other's habits and things like that. You don't have to constantly be...
It's weird. It's like a coworker that you don't actually... You're not in the same building at the same time.
Yeah.
You just see her. You tag out on the way out.
It's kind of funny because I'm thinking, when I used to work in restaurants, whoever opened the restaurant would always complain about whoever closed the restaurant, just doing a horrible job.
Right.
Is there any of that, or are you guys more professional than that? Do you ever come in the morning and go, "Oh my God, I can't believe she didn't do blah blah blah"? Or I'm assuming that
I'm lucky that there are no instances where that's happening, but. Sure, colleagues, just like any workplace,
of course.
If somebody's not pulling their weight and making your job harder, people will notice.
Yeah.
And something to take the students going forward, take with them is if you are on time and make other people's lives easier, and you're not kind of the liability of the room, then you'll go far.
I think that's a huge basic skill in any job, any situation where you're interacting with even one other person.
Yes.
Being on time. No. Those little basic things, and there is no class for it, and there's no...
Right.
It's just the simple thing, other people depend on you and vice versa. It matters if you show up when and where you're supposed to, or you're, not causing little problems for other people.
In terms of, lifestyle, there was an administrator who had kind of made a kind of joking comment about how doctors want to have the boats of their ancestors, or boats of the old golden era doctors, but they don't want to work as hard.
Those hours or something. Okay.
I mean, those my grandfather was putting in major.
It's an
hours.
interesting take. Yeah, he must have been.
Yeah. I mean, when you're the guy, your phone. There's no nurse practitioner covering you at night. It's
right.
He was running his own practice,
wow.
And so somebody had chest pain at night, they're calling him. And he's going to the hospital. Someone's got to deliver a baby. He's got to go.
That's a very good point.
The financial aspect of that was he was doing really well.
Yeah.
But there's pros and cons, and you have to decide. And there's still ways to do both. And as a physician now, getting out of training, you can go and try and start your own practice.
Sure.
It's becoming less and less frequent, though. The private practices are getting gobbled up by the hospitals. And more and more people like myself are choosing to be employed because they don't want to necessarily deal with the overhead and the headaches of running an office and firing nurses and keeping up with
because being a doctor and running a business are really two separate things, and you're deciding to embark on both together. Yeah,
absolutely. So there are opportunities to be both. You could probably make a little bit more money, or maybe even a lot more money if you choose to go that route. But for me, lifestyle was very important to me, and family, and so forth. Those things were more important to me than making more money.
Yeah. So the 7 and 7 framework is something that you're happy with, you feel good about it?
I wasn't sure in the beginning. I had to kind of sell it.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to imagine what that's like.
Yeah. And I have to say, I was told this morning before I left work that I had to give a shout out to my wife and son. So hey guys, so now that I've dealt with that, I had to kind of pitch it because the idea seemed cool to me, but you have to, your spouse
your life around
has to realize that every other weekend, you're gone.
Yeah.
It sounds great, 7 on, 7 off, great, but every other weekend you're working. And so a lot of weddings.
12-hour days and stuff, not there. Yeah.
So weddings and
just family
things, and holidays, if Christmas falls on that 7 on, then you're working.
Yeah.
And that's happened. happen half the times.
Yeah.
So you don't ever there's not vacation days or working out your schedule with somebody else to
there
make
is,
something. But that's
I have a counterpart who works the opposite week.
So you would have to just
so we would just
try
come
to
up
do
with a trade, come to the trading table.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Which we do.
So you could, in theory, do 14 on, 14 off if the other people are okay with.
Yep. Taking those
covering
days.
that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then you would, That's very interesting.
Do you ever think about at another point in your career, having your own practice or working in a different environment or anything? Or
yeah, I mean, I think that there aren't many people in my kind of position that are in their 60s or keep doing it, because at a point you have kids and they have soccer practices and the weekends become more valuable than the 7 off per se. I mean, if they're at school all day, and I'm not in that position yet, but there will be a time eventually where I'll want to transition to something else. I don't know what that is yet. Having my own practice, we've talked about that, and my wife kind of running the administration side, but she's pretty business oriented, and being involved. I've recently got involved in more administrative duties to see what that's like, and there is really a lack of leadership amongst physicians. There's a need for it, and when you have kind of the CEOs of hospitals that are coming from business school rather than med school, there's it can be a problem there.
Sure.
So kind of learning that kind of stuff. In terms of going back to school one day, I've thought about getting my MBA at some point, and there's programs for gaining that knowledge and running hospitals and hospital systems. That's something down the road it would be a possibility.
It's it's a hospital administration. Is it the term for that? What would you call that?
There's a medical MBA and there's a hospital administration position. I don't remember the exact terminology, but there's schools for that.
But you'd be in the kind of the business side of running a hospital, sort of, is what you're describing.
Exactly.
Basically, that's a potential later career move.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
The more of the traditional Monday to Friday.
Did you ever at any point have just some totally unrelated, not medical, I'd like to open a sports bar, or be a, any other kind of dream or anything that was just a totally unrelated path? Or was it just, you're going to be a doctor, David?
I had a lawn business in high school briefly over a summer, but never really, nothing serious. No, it was always going to be this. And I think there's pros and cons of that. I think the pros are that, if you start undergrad training knowing what you want to be, you can develop an advantage and a head start rather than showing up and enlisting in multiple different classes and trying to figure out as you go and then figuring it out. I mean, it's good to be open-minded, but it's also helpful if you know what you want to do and you can plan your schedule accordingly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. It's interesting because I feel like you hear a lot about, in certain family situations where a child is kind of expected to do a certain thing, and a lot of times doesn't go so well because the kid doesn't really want to do it. Doesn't take to it. It's an expectation you don't want to have. And for you, it seems like it worked out really well because you really, from everything you've described, being at your grandfather's funeral and being moved by that, and that felt so right, and it seems like it's fit you very, very well.
There was I think going through high school, and with that expectation, even elementary and middle school, of what you should be and what you're going to be, there was always a little tiny piece of me that was semi resentful maybe about that,
sort of laid out,
and what if this doesn't work out, and then my life's ruined. Fortunately, I had those experiences with my grandfather that helped me realize, okay, maybe they're right.
Was there any fallback, when you thought that, of what if this doesn't work out, then I'm gonna have to be an engineer, lawyer, or landowner?
It would probably be something in sports. I enjoy it so much. Something business side of sports or something like that. But once I got accepted to med school and I had to kind of make the decision, it was now it's real.
It's happening. Yeah.
And I remember there was a very important conversation with my dad. In Jacksonville, we were talking on it. We're on a drive, and now I was going to be moving I wasn't going to be an hour away. I was going to be 5 hours away, and my life was going to be consumed. It wasn't going to be coming home every weekend anymore. Those days were going to end. So I remember talking to him about it, and he told me, he's like, if you wanted to do anything here, I totally support you. You don't have to do this. I want you to do it because you want to do it. So that was a very important conversation for me, because then like that pressure,
it was your choice now,
was off, and it was my choice. And I think that was important for me going into starting med school, that I was the one signing the paper. Someone wasn't holding my hand.
Right. Do you think now as a father, do you anticipate like how much of that kind of nurturing / guidance / pressure, whatever you want to call it, do you anticipate doing on your own? Or have you thought that far ahead?
Yeah, I not in depth, but it sometimes I have thought about it, and I think it'll be similar approach as my younger brother. I'm going to tell him, I'm going to be like my grandfather was to me. I'll certainly bring him around. I'm not going to keep my life, my business life or my professional life separate from him. I want him to be immersed in it and see how happy it makes me.
Yeah.
I would like him to see, some of those experiences that I get to have with patients and so forth. And hopefully that will inspire him to want to do it. But if it doesn't, I'm not going to pitch a fit.
That's so great that you... I know that you're a sincere person, obviously, but it's so great that your love for this is so sincere that, you know what I mean? You're not just saying, oh, I really like being a doctor. Like, you clearly love it so much that it's a part of you and you want to share it with your child. Yeah. That's really something, and I think it's worth noting for all the negative things I was mentioning before and the financial aspects and those kinds of things. There are not a lot of professions where a lot of people who are in that profession say, this is like who I am, this is the reason I'm on earth, but I think a lot of doctors, a significantly higher percentage of doctors feel that way than, in other professions, and that's no small thing, and it's really incredible that you've cultivated that and arrived here through all this hard work and everything.
I think that in general, if you're a happy person and can find the bright side of whatever you're doing, you're going to be a happy person no matter what.
Yeah.
If you are a negative person and pessimistic and cynical, and you're gonna find reasons not to like whatever you're doing. So a lot of it starts with yourself.
Cool.
Do you have any?
Oh,
we have a camera. People can see me doing that. We're running out of time.
What time it is? Secretly. Do you? Like for people in the audience, which hope exists again, thinking of getting into med school or finding out if that's for them or whatever. Do you have any sort of general advice? Are you aware, talking to doctors coming in, like younger, newer doctors, that they're having a different kind of experience from what you had? You know what I mean?
Are there gaps, like things that you think they should have addressed or thought about in some cases, like enough that you've seen, like to say it's a generational issue? Do you know what I mean? Or
so somebody coming in from undergrad to medical school, is there something
that kind of thing? Yeah.
Well, I guess I was saying, through meeting those people, are you aware of anything that's going on kind of differently now for, like, say, a 15-year-old who thinks I want to be a doctor someday, that they should be like kind of thinking of, like, have in mind? Like you were kind of saying, for example, that the pre-med stuff didn't actually come into play once you were actually a doctor. It was more just like deal with these classes. Like, like that's a good. It seems like a good piece of advice to be
aware of.
Yeah, that like this is not the doctor experience what you're going through now. This is just like, in the sense that it's hard, a hard thing to get through, but not that like it's not a skill you're going to be using. Like, what are the important skills? I mean, you kind of covered it with the be a regular nice person and like trying to be considered and everything. But is there something that you can think of that a kid who's a junior in high school or something should be kind of thinking about right now, or is it just go to undergrad, pick the school that seems like the best fit? And it'll be more of an issue once you're really applying for med school? Or
if I'm talking to 15-year-old me, if there's anything I would tell them differently, I think it's just to be aware of what's out there. I mean, in terms of the financial implications of the debt you're taking on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Make sure that if you have the opportunity to go to an undergrad with a scholarship, like we were lucky enough to do,
yeah,
big advantage.
Yeah.
I would tell someone, if you have the opportunity to go somewhere where it's all paid for versus somewhere where you're paying, taking on a few $100,000 of debt, take the scholarship and then save that debt for the med school part, because you're likely not going to get a scholarship in medical school. So that's something to be in, because I know physicians now out of practice a few years that are only just paying off their debt, and everything they were making was going towards paying that off, and they're the responsible ones. And there's others that just let it build up and
defer it.
It gets
worry about it later.
So that would be a big piece of advice.
Plan ahead a little bit for the financial impact.
Well, and something else too, I think, when you are in high school and finishing up and about to go to undergrad, it feels like just a huge change. It is a huge change, but it feels like your whole life has been leading up to this choice, and you get to now pick and be an adult and go wherever you want. And I think people don't recognize that there's going to be a time when that's over. You actually have to go be an adult, and the whatever pleasure or notoriety or whatever you might have thought you were going to have from this undergrad degree is less meaningful when you're 30 or 40 or 50 than it seems like it's going to be when you're 15 making that decision, And if you can get out of that situation with as little debt as possible, I don't think there's anybody in their 30s or older who would say that that's a bad idea. I think we would all say, no, do the one where you don't have to pay money for decades on that. So it's an interesting thing, age, distinction kind of a thing.
And I think being aware of the scholarships that are out there. I knew kids in undergrad that, there's phone books out there full of the different scholarship opportunities. That
phone books were a thing back when people had phone numbers.
Because they measure up books.
It's like a magazine, a big magazine.
And it would come to your front door periodically, even though you didn't want it, and it had everyone's name in it.
You couldn't avoid it.
But these things just full of scholarship opportunities. I remember, and and they're out there. No one knows about them, and I imagine they go unfulfilled. And so. If you're having, if you're not fortunate from a financial standpoint to have support of your parents and so forth, then to go out there and do your research and see what you can do,
what possibilities exist.
I do want to ask also something we covered this. Is there what is the most surprising thing to you? What has been the most surprising since you've become a doctor and seen what the life is like? I guess, is there any particular aspect of that was not what you expected, or that you had to adjust to, or anything like that? Or it seems like you, more than most people, you shadowed your grandfather, you were more kind of had a little sneak preview into that world already. I guess, is there any particular thing that was not what you expected?
I can't think of anything offhand that's been surprising. It's I guess one thing I could say is the documentation is how important it is.
Okay.
One of the biggest complaints of physicians that I know is that we spend, and it's getting worse, we spend so much time at the computer documenting and less time with the patients, because it's because there's just so much clicking you have to do and so forth, because that is the record. And from a medical legal standpoint and so forth, the orders that we're placing, there's a lot of benefits to having electronic medical record, but we're also spending
someone has to create those records.
And so that's something that's been surprising, and it's kind of universal. We all kind of agree, and it's one of the problems in medicine that we're hopeful some Steve Jobs type person can help us fix.
Streamline that or something. So in a 12-hour day on average, how many hours would you say you're in a patient's room versus on a computer versus whatever else you're doing?
70-30 computer.
70-30 computer. So those are the two primary things you do, either with a person or with a computer.
You're doing your walking from the floors, and you're in the doctor's lounge for lunch and so forth. But in terms of doing our clinical responsibilities, it's 70-30 computer, which is, you imagine when you're, getting out of undergrad med school, you're just going to, be with patients, and, and it's becoming less and less so where you have the time to do it, because you have to document
all this stuff.
And when you were in med school doing the rotations, were those rotations the patient side of things? You weren't sitting in a room watching doctors fill out forms on computers, right?
A lot of times they're sending you home. You're doing your rounds, you're seeing the patients, and they don't necessarily want you hovering around while they're doing the
documentation. So like you're exposed to that side of it, but not so much.
Not necessarily
the other one.
Yeah. And would that be something? So like when your brother shadows you, will he see you doing the documentation stuff as well?
When I've had people shadow me before, I'm usually saying, you don't have to. You don't have to. Right.
This is just 2/3 of what I do.
Probably now that I'm saying this out loud, I probably will make him sit around.
The reality. Yeah.
So it is noon.
It is. Is there any question that we didn't ask that we should have? Anything you think we might have left out or didn't cover? Anything?
I can't think of it. I think we
you were. I can't thank you enough. You were super transparent and open and helpful.
Very eye-opening.
And I can't guarantee that anyone will see this or hear it, but if they do, they will find it helpful. I'm very sure.
This is a life goal, being on a podcast.
You've done it.
Well,
I've told everyone, like literally.
Listen, I'd love to see you that day, but my whole morning is cleared out.
So glad I can help with that.
As a fan of podcasts myself,
I
wish
you are now part of Podcast Canada.
Yeah, thank you.
How exciting for you.
Yeah.
Once more, I'd like to thank David for sharing his time with us. And I think whether you were considering going into a career in the medical field or not, there's really a lot that you can learn from what he just said. I'd like to point out a couple of things.
All right, let's hear them.
Okay, here they come. For me, one thing that I've heard, most of the people that I know who are doctors who are my age or older, a lot of them, as we mentioned just now in the interview, have kind of talked about how the profession has sort of evolved, involving now more paperwork, more software that you have to use, more legal issues and thinking about insurance and all that kind of stuff. And for a lot of people that I've heard feedback from, that has sort of, not been a thing that they really love necessarily about the profession. But I really was interested in and very happy to hear David say that, okay, all that stuff's going on, but it's not that bad, and I still love what I do.
Still helping people, like if that's your driving.
And it's such a beautiful thing to hear a doctor say that, and it really helps drive home to do this in this profession. You should feel that way, and the vast majority of doctors do. And I
Absolutely.
think, just a very, very important thing to keep in mind. Like I said, whether you're considering this profession or not, at some point we're all either going to be a doctor or go to a doctor.
Interact with a doctor.
Some people will do both.
Yes.
So it's just very, very useful, I think, and extremely beneficial to hear what an actual doctor thinks about the profession, and especially one who loves it and is apparently so dedicated to it.
Yeah, it was very unusual to talk to somebody who just, it seemed like from a young age, he was going to be a doctor, and it happened.
And he loves
he
it.
actually followed through with it. Not that like people don't follow through with it, but a lot of times, you get pointed in another direction or whatever. But to want that from so early in life, and obviously he was very influenced by his grandfather and the time that he spent around his grandfather.
And another thing too, to kind of grind away at it the way that he did. He mentioned that there are a lot of classes you have to take that are challenging classes and don't actually directly touch on what you go on.
It's almost like, you want to be a doctor? Get through this. It's not really going to help you doc to anyone.
But also, I, as someone who's known David off and on for a while, I was very surprised to hear him say that he doesn't think of himself as being extremely intelligent or gifted.
As someone who went to high school with David and has known him for a while, there's nobody who knows David who would think that.
So that was interesting.
That is a huge lesson
from the standpoint of the way that you see yourself is not necessarily the way that other people see
you think,
yourself.
I'm so bad at this, or I have to work so hard to do that. Right. Maybe you do, but most people do. If you walk around and you don't notice other people trying that hard, it doesn't mean they're not trying that hard. People try super hard to look like they're not trying hard, and they're good at it, and you're probably better at it than you realize.
I would never have guessed that he felt like it was that much. I mean, obviously, medical school is not easy for anyone. No one ever said that was a breeze, but I would never have guessed that the entire trajectory of his academic career was as big of a challenge for him as he seems to have felt that
when
it was.
He started going to the magnet schools and felt like he was in that environment with a lot of other quote-unquote smart kids, as though he was not one of the smart kids, which, as far as everybody else is concerned, he certainly was. I never noticed that in him. I never would have guessed it being around him, but it was very interesting to hear that and to in retrospect, understand the effort that he put in and the way that he described, feeling like he had to work extra hard, and he did it. He was motivated and he got it done, and it's awesome. Yeah.
Another thing that was interesting for me to hear him talk about it, and something that I've heard other people talk about, especially clients in the past whose families were physicians or in this kind of field, and maybe they were considering going into it.
Yeah.
This idea of shadowing. I didn't know that was a thing. Like when I was the age when you might consider shadowing someone in the medical fields, I didn't know.
It seems like for whatever reason, particularly in the medical field, as opposed to, I mean, there's other people you could probably shadow if you want to do it, but it seems like
that one interview with the policeman who did a ride along when he was younger, same kind of a thing.
Yeah, but it seems, I think, did David say pretty much every doctor he knows has had that at some point?
Every doctor that I know has done it.
Yeah.
But when I was the age, where I might have been considering doing it myself, I didn't know
You're
that
not
was
aware
a thing.
That's a thing you could just try to make happen.
And it's a great example of how, if you are interested in a profession, you should try to read up on it and see, how does someone get into this?
Maybe this is a way to learn more
about
it.
Now. You can kind of find out about those things more easily. Don't wait for someone to tell you.
Go on, whatever social media channel you use and just say, hey, does anybody know somebody who does this job or that job? And I'd like to talk to them and maybe even see them, and if you show interest in somebody's job, they're probably going to like that and feel important and want you to be there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But shadowing seems like
and
a really important
another
experience.
thing that he mentioned in connection with that was the importance, if you are going to shadow someone or do any kind of thing along those lines, the importance of showing up on time.
Exactly.
Like being polite.
Those
and
little simple things make such a difference.
Absolutely.
You can make a horrible impression right off the bat by being late and not communicating, or you can do what you said you were going to do and show up and be polite and nice and everything, and it's a world of difference.
And if you're out there listening to this and you are the kind of person who habitually shows up on time and does that kind of thing, you might be thinking, are there really that many people who don't do it?
Oh man.
And the answer is yes.
Yes.
And conversely, if you are the kind of person who doesn't really make a habit out of doing that, and you're thinking, well, no one notices or cares that is not true.
People
in
notice
a professional
and they care,
context, right? People are showing up to do the best job that they can do, ideally. And they want to be surrounded by people who are also showing up to do the best job.
They very much value their time and their energy and everything like that. And if they feel like they're putting it into something and you are not, then they are not going to want to.
That's a natural way to feel, right? Especially if there is someone else they could be mentoring, who is going to bother to do those things and show.
And a lot of these things are fairly simple. And if there's some cataclysmic thing and you are super late and you have a really good reason, communicate about that and let them know. If you can text them on your way and say, "Oh, I'm going to be late because." As we were late to meet David. But we let him know. It was a long drive. But even, honestly, I mean, we are being hilarious about it, but it is a very sincere, very, very real. It makes a huge difference if you're late and you never said a word about it, or if you're late and you text as soon as you know you're going to be late and say, this is the situation. I'm sorry about it. I'm going to get there as soon as I can. A lot of people, I think, don't do that just thinking, what does it matter? I'm late either way.
Yeah.
But it's a huge difference. It shows respect for the other person and lets them know, that you're valuing the time that you're giving them. So yes, if you're going to shadow somebody, make a huge effort to be considerate and present
and be the kind of person that you would want shadowing you if you had worked hard to get into a profession and took your time very seriously and did your best to help people. Yeah. Who would you want shadowing you?
And don't be, the point of being there is to ask questions, and you don't want to get in the way of the doctor, dealing with a patient. But if there's
we assume we've never shadowed
we assume that, it
seems like how
exactly intuitively we're going to give that advice, But if there's a lull or something, and you say, hey, can I ask you some questions about what just happened, or do you mind if I, get in there? I'm sure the person is expecting that you're going to have questions, and they want to help you with them.
Another kind of interesting thing to me that came out of this talk is sort of being able to kind of peek behind the scenes and see a little bit into how a hospital is run, or at least how this particular part of this particular hospital seems to be run, and all of this kind of shifting in some ways towards things like increasing use of various types of softwares, both to track patients and to do maybe some basic diagnostic stuff. David mentioned having
the
a doctor
FaceTime thing.
Yeah, on the iPad or whatever,
FaceTime.
coming in. Dr. FaceTime.
Somebody just brings a floating doctor head into your room. And,
sure, right, exactly.
It seems kind of obvious in retrospect, but I didn't know we were there already.
Right. And, obviously, if you are, to me, it's obvious, if you're considering going into one of these health professions, you would want to be sort of just aware of where those trends might be going.
This is kind of the way it's going. And,
how that might impact your decisions if you're still in the phase of, doing your education or doing your own shadowing. How can you expose yourself to those kinds of trends just so you can have your own ideas about where that's likely to go in the future.
Something else to ask a doctor that you might be shadowing. And another, I think, really interesting part of that, going along with what you said, was I think David said that in a normal day, he guesses that he spends about 70% of his time on a computer. Which is more than I would have thought.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's more than his grandfather spent because he might not even have had a computer before when he started. But yeah, I mean, obviously, I assume when you're on the computer, you're doing doctory things. So, it's still medicine, but it's not talking to people. It's not what you would imagine when you're thinking, I'd like to be a doctor.
Right, exactly. I would bet that most people who are considering going into the profession, if they haven't, because David even said when he shadowed people, they just told him to go home so they didn't have to watch him do that.
Yeah, because you think, this is boring. Why? And then, he mentioned that when his brother shadows him, he's like, I should actually make him watch me do that because, if you want to give an accurate...
and again, this is not to discourage anyone who's interested in these professions.
It's just, here's the information we have, and you should probably know.
He loves it. He wants his own child to do it, so obviously,
but this is part of the experience, at least for, this doctor that we just spoke to, and, he seems to think that that's pretty standard. Yeah, some version of that. Another interesting thing was his schedule, the whole 7 days on, 7 days off. I actually heard about that from another doctor friend, so he's not the only one. I guess I don't know if that's standard but it's definitely out there. I didn't know that was...
There's a variety of flexible schedules in my own limited experience with friends who do this kind of thing.
I have a friend who's in ER medicine, and that apparently is much more predictable than a lot of
in terms of
fields,
the number of
in
hours
terms of your schedule. Yeah.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, there's a whole range of quality of life kinds of issues as a doctor, for your hours and your predictability of your schedule, balanced off with the money that you make or where you might live. There's so many variables there that are certainly worth.
Yeah, and along those lines, also, when David mentioned different types of specialties, how some specialties have a reputation, among other doctors for being like, this one you make a lot of money, but it's very stressful. This one is relatively easy, and all of those kinds of things. Very important, I think, to take into consideration if you are considering moving down in that direction, right? You would want to know what's the difference between being, this kind of surgeon versus a dermatologist versus an ophthalmologist versus whatever.
Yeah, I think a ton of our perception of different career paths, especially earlier in life when you're making those decisions more, when you're, high school or college or even earlier, it's similar to I was going to mention Oregon Trail. I don't know if anybody listening to this knows what that is, but it's an old video game where you would set out on the Oregon Trail and you make some decisions in the beginning and you're like, do you want to be a banker? Do you want to be a carpenter? And, if you're a carpenter, you make less money, but you could fix your wagon as you go along. If you're a banker, you have more money, but you can't do those skills.
Sure.
And it's almost like this box you check that you have this job, but that's your life. That's what you do every day for a long time.
Not in the Oregon Trail.
It was an immersive game. No, in real life, if you choose to be this kind of doctor or that kind of doctor, it's not just the salary difference. It's a lot of stuff, and that's true of any job, but it's really hard to appreciate what that means for anybody until you actually start doing it.
Of shadowing, right?
Until you've committed a ton of time and money to it, and then you find out, I didn't realize I'd be working late nights, 6 nights a week all the time forever, or whatever it is. But
along those lines too, for me, one of the most interesting things and very uplifting, positive. I'm glad I got to hear this. Was David talking about how he really likes being able to connect with people and care for them and actually make their lives noticeably better in difficult times. It's a special kind of person.
Yeah, absolutely.
To want to confront those times.
And the aspect of it of talking with a family about a loved one, getting bad news or passing away. I mean, that's intense, that's real, and that again goes along with this is part of the experience.
Although it's something kind of interesting too, when he mentioned that they don't really give you classes on how to do that.
They just kind of throw you in there.
I don't mean to laugh because it's a very serious thing, but
wow,
it feels like something I would want to have a class on if I were going to be a person.
Tell me, I think he said they just kind of hope that the doctors that you are not shadowing, but you're going along, in med school in your residency, that you kind of pick it up along the way from them. But I mean,
then also I think the assumption, at least just again from things that I've heard and read, the assumption is if you're entering this profession, this is kind of what you want to do. Not that you want to have people being sick or whatever, but
you're going to be in this environment.
Right, you know, and
some people
sort of
do not feel comfortable in that.
Right, helping
some people do.
in that kind of
I actually, now that I think of it, I had a doctor give me much less bad news, but bad news when I was in high school about being able to wrestle. And the bad news was that I couldn't anymore. Spoiler alert.
You have to wrestle 3 times a day forever.
Medically, you have to wrestle. But yeah, he did a terrible job, and it was really upsetting. I didn't really think about it until just now and make the connection. And that's not nearly as bad news as it is for some people.
I'll never forget this. I had a doctor, just like I don't even know what the proper term is, but just a sort of general all-purpose doctor. You know, like the guy that you just go see periodically to get it, whatever that's called. Doctor, I think. I should really know.
Why is it? Yeah. General practitioner. GP.
There you go. That sounds like a thing. That's a phrase I've heard. Yeah. But I mentioned to him that I was worried about a blood condition or something because my grandfather had died of it, and he goes, people die. Like,
whoa!
Right. And he caught himself after.
Which you could hear him saying that in his head because he's a doctor, but to say it out loud to you. But yeah, when I was the guy was like, I was there with my mom, who is also Mike's mom, our mom, me and Mike, not you listeners.
Unless,
yeah, probably not. And the doctor and my mom said something about, he's a wrestler, and the guy goes, his wrestling days are over. Which is the first time anybody mentioned, and he said it as though I already knew that. Like, of course, his wrestling days are over. And I remember not reacting at all in the moment. And then as we left, I went to the bathroom to cry.
Sure.
And it wasn't, some people are like, they're counting on that for a scholarship. It's like a part of it. It wasn't like that for me. It's not, it wasn't that kind of, like I was going to head for the NFL and I wrecked my knee and I couldn't play.
You can't walk. Like,
it wasn't even that bad. I mean, realistically. But it was just so abrupt, and I didn't know that was the situation. And my friends were on the wrestling team, and I really enjoyed it. And I, it was a big deal for me at that moment. And the guy handled it badly, and he had wrestled in high school too. That guy,
really,
he should have known. It mattered anyway. But yeah, whatever. I'm sure the guy has delivered much worse news in his life. Hopefully,
that's
do that
another
a little
thing
better.
To keep in mind. I would imagine
for him the perspective.
If you're an older doctor listening to this conversation right now, you're like, having your wrestling days be over is not that big a deal compared to other things. Sure, absolutely. But for you as a patient,
and it's awesome that David seems to clearly have an ability to perform well in those situations, in the matter of being sensitive and understanding, for you, it might feel like it's another patient, but for them, it's a huge day in their lives and a really bad day, probably, for most people, unfortunately.
Sure.
But yeah, and that's another one of those things. Like, this is part of the reality. If you're going to go down this career path, every specialty, I guess, probably doesn't deal with the same number. If you want to go into one specialty as opposed to another, some of them might deal more with like end of life type situations, and some of them might not. But there's going to be some mix of, there's going to be some bad news mixed in there.
The types of challenges you'll face,
and you're going to need to stand face to face with people, and maybe be in an uncomfortable situation, and that's part of the skill set you're going to hopefully have if this is a path you want to go down. Another much more practical thing that I think was really important that David mentioned was when you're going into undergrad, you're going to have options that are more affordable. You're probably going to have some kind of scholarships you can try to go for. And that's a very interesting point of med school, that kind of pretty much goes away. For most people, the assumption is, well, you're going to be a doctor, so you're going to pay, these tuition fees, and then you're going to have the debt because you can afford it because you're going to be a doctor. So you want to try to plan for that ahead of time. I mean, it's honestly, for almost anybody, it's great advice anyway, even if you're not going to be a doctor, to try to minimize the cost of your undergraduate education.
Sure, because the undergraduate degree, generally for most fields where a degree or some kind of academic certification matters, for a lot of those fields, you're going to have to go beyond undergraduate anyway. You're going to have to go for a master's or a PhD or an MD or something. On the other hand, if you have a field where those things don't matter so much, where having a bachelor's degree or having any kind of academic thing doesn't really matter that much, then it also kind of doesn't really matter.
They're mostly interchangeable.
Where it comes from.
Yeah, if you have the degree and it's...
And this is speaking very broadly, obviously. Not saying it's going to apply to every single person.
That's generally going to be accurate.
To go into significant debt for an undergraduate degree generally doesn't make a ton of sense for most.
Absolutely.
And it was good to have him point that out.
Yeah, and it's extra important in medical school because you are going to go into debt for med school in almost any situation.
Sure.
So you might as well not pile on by going to an undergraduate school that costs a ton of money if you can avoid it. Most people have some kind of an in-state option, or they can
or just whatever your options are.
Try for any number of scholarships that might be available. Just
ones.
bear in mind that those options probably will not be out there for med school. I thought that was really made a ton of sense once he pointed it out. So yeah, that's all for now. If you like the show, please take a moment to rate and review us on iTunes or the podcast player of your choice. And of course, if you want to hear more episodes, remember to subscribe as well. You can find our SAT Prep Black Book and ACT Prep Black Book on Amazon.com, and you can find our online video courses on QuestPrep.com. Please tune in for our next episode coming up in a couple of weeks. And in the meantime, feel free to reach out to us on our Quest Prep Facebook page or the Quest Prep YouTube channel. This episode was hosted by myself, Patrick Barrett, and my brother, Mike Barrett. Our guest was Dr. David Khosrowzadeh, Dr. K to his patients. Every musical element was created and performed by Parker Hale Hastings. A newborn blue whale is about as long as a school bus, drinks 50 gallons of milk per day, and gains 10 pounds per hour.
And here's that special segment on math and standardized tests that we promised you earlier in the episode. Most test takers don't realize that the math sections of the SAT and the ACT are specifically designed by the test makers to be different from the kind of math that you would see on a normal high school math test. This causes most test takers to make two fundamental mistakes, and both mistakes make the math sections of these standardized tests seem much harder than they actually are. First, most people try to approach math on the ACT and the SAT the same way they would attack questions in math class. In other words, they use a slow, methodical approach based on formulas and repetition. So these test takers look at each question and hope that it sparks some kind of mental connection to a formula they once learned in school, and then they try to remember all the steps they learned for applying that formula. And the second mistake comes up when the test taker realizes they don't actually know a formula for the question they're looking at, which is something that happens pretty often, actually. So the second mistake is that people assume that if they don't know a formula for a question, then the question must be impossible for them to answer. Again, this goes back to the way math is usually taught in school, which involves drilling formulaic responses into your head until those responses become habit. Math class doesn't reward you for coming up with new approaches to strange questions, so you naturally assume that if you can't answer a math question, it must be because nobody ever showed you exactly how to do that kind of math question, and you won't be able to come up with the right approach on your own. But when you understand how these standardized tests are designed, you'll see that there are simpler, quicker ways to approach math questions on them, and these approaches would often literally be punished in a high school math class because they don't involve formulas. These kinds of shorter, more effective solutions often require you to take advantage of the unwritten rules of a standardized test. They may also reward you for doing things like thinking in abstract ways, or noticing patterns in the set of answer choices, or reading extremely carefully, or even using your calculator to avoid actually doing the math question in the way that a normal high school teacher would think of doing a math question. And by the way, while I have you here, all of this is just one more reason why it's so critical to practice with real official test questions. The problem here is that fake practice questions written by companies besides the College Board or ACT Inc. don't always follow the same rules of question design that the real test has to follow, which means that the fake math questions you might see from those other companies may not offer these kinds of faster solutions. So practicing with fake questions can sometimes prevent you from developing the same good test-taking instincts that you might be able to develop when working with real official test questions from the companies that actually make the test. Anyway, our test prep black books and online video courses for the SAT and the ACT contain all the training that you'll need to start noticing these faster solutions that are available on official math questions from those tests and start applying those solutions with confidence. In both our black books and our online courses, the whole goal of our training is to turn you into the kind of test taker who routinely notices these efficient solutions and then does them accurately and consistently. Because that kind of thinking is the key to beating a standardized test. For more information on our books and video courses, head over to questprep.com. You can also find our black books for the SAT and the ACT on Amazon.com.